About what Big Tent politics really means, what it looks like, and especially the history of Big Tent politics. Chairwoman Sotelo and Senator Litzow, having you here tonight shows that the Republican Party in this county is definitely a Big Tent party. It's an inclusive party. But Big Tent politics did not begin here tonight in Seattle. It didn't begin when I started this Big Tent tour last September. It began back in 1977 in California, when a referendum was going before the voters of that state, pushed by an anti-gay Republican by the name of Senator Briggs. It was called the Briggs Initiative, otherwise known as Proposition 6. It was a referendum not unlike 2008's Proposition 8. But instead of the voters of California being asked to go to the polls to vote on whether or not to make marriage equality illegal, the voters of California in 1977 were being asked to go to the polls to vote on whether or not they wanted to make it illegal to promote quote-unquote gay propaganda in California public schools. Essentially what this would have done, it would have been like don't ask, don't tell for California public school teachers. If you were an openly gay teacher in California public schools, you could be fired simply just for being gay. If you oppose the Briggs Initiative, you could be fired for that, because that would be considered gay propaganda as well. And at the time, let's remember, this is 1977, it looked like Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative, was going to pass. It was going to pass overwhelmingly, by a margin of 2-1. Until a gentleman who had been governor of California in the past, who had run for president of the United States in the past, and who was looking to run for president of the United States again, a man by the name of Ronald Reagan, came out against the Briggs Initiative. And instead of passing by a margin of 2-1, the Briggs Initiative failed by a margin of 2-1. And in order to support Ronald Reagan and to pay homage to the history that the Republican Party has in Big Tent politics, in emancipation, in suffrage, in the Civil Rights Act, the name Log Cabin Republicans was chosen as an umbrella name for this group of gay Republicans that was organizing in California to push the Republican Party toward Big Tent politics, toward equality, and to support President Reagan. Some people in this room, I dare say many in this room, are probably familiar with that story. I dare also say some are not. I point this out to say that we're in the midst right now, not of just this Big Tent tour, but of a battle to maintain the history of log cabin Republicans in promoting Big Tent politics. I met shortly after becoming executive director with Governor Tom Ridge, former governor of Pennsylvania, was the first Secretary of Homeland Security for President George W. Bush, and sat down with him and he said, I said, do you know anything about log cabin Republicans, Governor? And he said, I know a little bit, but tell me the story. And I told him the story about Reagan and Briggs, and he said, wow, you got to tell that story every chance you get. Not just to other log cabin Republicans, not just to the next generation of log cabin Republicans, but especially to those rock-ribbed social conservatives, the exclusionary conservatives, who tend to lionize Ronald Reagan. Make sure that the history and the founding of log cabin Republicans is maintained. And so I'm charging everyone this evening to evangelize, pun intended, that story. Much like Governor Ridge had advised me, tell that story every chance you get. Tell that story, not just so that that history is remembered, but because Ronald Reagan championed Big Tent politics. And tell it also because nobody else is going to be telling that story. It's the responsibility of everyone in this room to make sure to keep telling that story. I had the distinct honor of being a part of Log Cabin Republicans of New York State during the run-up to the marriage vote in New York State in 2009, when the common thinking was, in order to pass marriage equality in New York State, we need to flip control of the Senate chamber from Republican control, where it had been for the better part of half a century, to Democratic control. And in the 2008 election, hundreds of thousands, I dare say millions of dollars poured in, and I mean poured in because it was coming from outside organizations, into New York State to flip the chamber from Republican to Democrat. You know what? They did it. For the first time in half a century, the state Senate flipped from Republican control to Democratic control. Democrats got their wish. And the Senate passed a marriage equality bill. The Assembly passed a marriage equality bill. You had a Democratic governor, Governor Patterson, and you had a Democratic Senate. And when the marriage bill went from the Assembly to the Democratic-controlled Senate, did it pass? Failed. And it failed big time. It wasn't just Republicans voting against it, it was 8 Democrats voting against the bill as well. Flash forward to 2 years later, when the former majority leader, the then minority leader, Republican leader, Dean Skelos, came to Log Cabin Republicans of New York and said, if you guys and gals help put Republicans back in control of the Senate chamber, we will bring the marriage bill up for a vote. Big tent politics, right? Well, the Democrats howled. Even the LGBT advocacy organizations howled. They said the Republicans cannot be trusted. They never brought up the bill in the past. Instead of flipping the chamber back to Republican control, even though the Democrats betrayed us, the real solution is to put even more Democrats into the New York State Senate, right? Sound familiar? Well, what happened was, thankfully that didn't happen, Republicans retook control of the Senate chamber in 2010. And in 2011, just 2 years after the marriage bill went down in flames in the New York State Senate because Democrats were voting against it, the bill came up for a conscience vote, and it passed. It passed for the first time, and the only time a marriage equality bill has passed to date in a Republican-controlled legislature. And it passed because 4 Republicans made the critical difference so that that bill reached the critical threshold of votes that it needed in order to pass the Senate chamber. Sound familiar, right? Now I say this because once again, you can't trust Democrats to tell that story. You can't rely on Democrats to say that in New York State, it was Republicans that brought the marriage bill up for a vote, and it was Republicans that are the reason that bill passed. Senator, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing here in Washington, the chances of relying on Democrats to say that Republicans made the critical difference so that marriage equality became a reality, making sure that story is told, probably falls on the shoulders of more people in this room than it would other Democrats, right? I don't want to jump to assumptions, but I would assume, but just traveling around the country, this is what I've seen. You can't trust Democrats to tell that story because it doesn't fit with this narrative, the big tent narrative. And media right now is really fond of pushing this storyline that there is a civil war within the Republican Party. We squabble sometimes. It happens. I dare say, it's why we're Republicans. We tend to think individually. We don't walk in lockstep on these issues. When you have Republicans in the United States Senate who come to support marriage equality for what I believe to be very principled reasons, Senator Portman has a gay son, Senator Murkowski from Alaska met with lesbian constituents who happen to be adoptive parents, and once she found out that one parent was not able to have the same parental adoptive rights as the other, she said that inequality is a disconnect. There's a genuine inequality here. You have Senator Collins, who said she supports states' rights. The people of her state voted to make marriage equality a reality, and so she too supported the desires of the people in her state. And Senator Kirk from Illinois, who had a stroke, and his own mortality made him rethink his opposition to marriage equality. It's quite different than 24 Democratic senators on the same day announcing their support for marriage equality. Do you think that's because they had some sort of principled epiphany one evening? Or do you think it's because the DNC called them up and said, this is how you have to think now? Right? So when we talk about the Republican Party and the challenges that we have, I think it's better to frame it that we're individual thinkers in this regard. And I dare say that there's a greater amount of civility that is characteristic of Big Tent politics that you will find in the Republican Party than you will in the Democratic Party. And so the last thing I would just say in regard to Big Tent politics, and then if you like, I'm happy to take people's questions if they're interested. I think we need to own the fact that we are LGBT Republicans. If you haven't been owning it, the time is now. If you're a straight ally of LGBT Republicans, it's time to step up and own that. I'm really tired of people saying, I'm a Republican, but I support marriage equality. Right? Or I'm a Republican, but wait, no, but I don't believe in discrimination against LGBT individuals. Right? I'm a Republican, but it's time to stop saying I'm a Republican, but, and time to start saying I'm a Republican and. Yeah, I'm a Republican and I support marriage equality. I'm a Republican and I support non-discrimination for LGBT individuals. I'm a Republican and I am a straight ally of the LGBT community. I'm a Republican and I voted for marriage equality. And maybe even take it one step farther. I'm a Republican because I support marriage equality, because I support family values. And I understand that when a loving and committed couple simply want to enter into a civil marriage partnership, it's making them less likely to rely on the federal government for assistance. It's making sure that they and their families have the same rights, protections, responsibilities, and, to be fair, in some cases, burdens that come with marriage. I'm a Republican because I support my LGBT brothers and sisters. I'm a Republican because this is a party that has its roots in equality for all Americans. And I believe that should translate to the LGBT community. So do that. So those are my two charges for you this evening. Go out and evangelize what Big Tent politics means. Go out and evangelize the history of log cabin Republicans and where the Big Tent tour actually began. And own being a Republican. Don't shy away from telling people you are a log cabin Republican. And when people ask you why, I say I'm a log cabin Republican, and with that, I'm happy to take your questions.